All right. Welcome back, everyone, to our afternoon session. It's a great pleasure to welcome our next speaker, with whom I've had the pleasure of personal acquaintance, Kermit Cole. Kermit entered adulthood first as a mime and then a filmmaker, making films on topics ranging from before comedy, about the discovery of comedy by prehistoric clowns, to Living Proof, HIV and the Pursuit of Happiness, a documentary about living with joy and humor in the face of HIV and AIDS. The latter project carried him into working with severely traumatized people who often had been diagnosed as psychotic or schizophrenic. Ultimately, he became licensed as a marriage and family therapist in order to work with social networks in the grips of psychosis. He and his partner work as a team, inspired by Finland's Open Dialogue program, which has achieved the world's best long-term outcomes for first episode psychosis. His clinical observations led him to study why humor seemed to be present, if not figural, in moments of positive change. He offers his observations in the hope of using humor with confidence, precision, power, and safety, and perhaps most importantly, so as not to exclude something that may be an essential component of the human experience. So over to you, Kermit, and thank you very much for presenting today.
Well, let's give it a shot, see how it goes. First, I want to just really just say how amazing and impressive the morning's presentations were. I learned a lot. Hope I can even make it into the foothills of what's been done here. But at least I can, at the very least, what I can say is I have something a little different to offer. Hopefully amusing. This is you're seeing this morning's title. I've been changing the title again and again leading up to it. So here we go. There we go. In 1955, Albert Einstein, the comedian Sid Caesar, who was the top comedian of the day with the show of shows, got a phone call and was told that Albert Einstein, who you see here, wanted to meet with him. He didn't know why, so he started studying up on relativity to get ready for the meeting. But unfortunately, he got word that Einstein had died before the meeting took place. So we don't know what Einstein was thinking. We don't have the product of that. And they never met, so I don't have a picture of them together. This is actually Einstein with Charlie Chaplin, who was also one of Einstein's best friends. One of the only people that Einstein, when he first moved to America, came to America, said he really wanted to meet. And this is them years later at the premiere of City Lights. But anyway, sometime after that meeting that didn't happen, Sid Caesar was approached by J. Robert Oppenheimer at a lecture that Sid Caesar gave at Columbia, and Oppenheimer explained, Albert wanted to see you. He said he'd figured out the physical equation, and he wanted to talk to you about the human equation. So apparently, toward the end of his life, this is something Einstein was thinking about. He was thinking that humor somehow was a variable in the human equation, and he was trying to solve it. So we don't, as I said, we don't have the answer for why or what he was thinking. But I'm just going to take the time I have today to see if we can come up with some speculation about that, some of the clues. Now, something else that was said, possibly around that time, and maybe some of you have heard this, saying comedy equals tragedy plus time. That's mostly attributed to Steve Allen. It's also been attributed to Mark Twain and various other people. So the questions that come to mind is, well, obviously Albert Einstein thought a lot about time. Was that somehow a part of this equation? If so, can we figure out how much time? There we go. Can we figure out how much time he might have been thinking? Or, yeah, in what way, what is time? actually, and how would time figure into this equation? I'm going to propose that another way to think about this is not simply about that time. When we talk about time, what we're actually talking about is perspective. But we'll get into that more. Now, another person that comes into this story is, I expect most of you know Henri Bergson. He's notable for many reasons, among them William James, having said he was the most significant philosopher since Aristotle. And around the time and he's also known for having written at the time the only complete volume that we know of on the subject of humor by a major philosopher. There's, of course, there's speculation that Aristotle also wrote a book on humor that we lost, that has been lost. But at the time, he was the only major philosopher that took on humor as a main, enough of a subject to really focus in that level. He described humor, sort of the summary quote, or a summary quote from that book was, humor was the mechanical encrusted on the living. An example, for instance, somebody walking along with, with pride, let's say, and then stumbling and falling, and falling, and then so that's well, anyway, I don't. It's actually a fairly hard thought to penetrate, but it becomes a little more clear to me looking at actually another. So why I'm bringing up Bergson here is that there's a famous debate between Einstein and Bergson. Bergson began to in the early days of relativity coming on the scene, criticized relativity. He had a lot to say about it being, in part, the debate that Einstein and Bergson had was on the nature of time. Can time, in fact, be divided up in the way that it needed to be in order for relativity to make sense? Or if we're talking about space-time, can space and time be divided up in a way such that you can have two distinct perspectives, a near perspective and a far perspective, that you would need to have in order for relativity to work? Einstein reacted to that, and Bergson was making a distinction in saying that, but he was saying that that relativity is concerned with mechanical time, but that it's that time was not actually so simply described by a clock. A clock measures time, but time, he asserted, was actually a living phenomenon. It's a human phenomenon, not something that can be, independently observed and measured in that way. That there's something else, something much more fundamental going on. And basically, what he was trying to say, the important thing he was saying, is that he did not quibble with a lot of the evident validity of relativity. There were experiments, there was validation, there was value. But he was mainly, I think, saying that relativity, and in fact science, is not the last word on human life. And I think that circles back to the mechanical encrusted on the living. We can describe ourselves in lots of ways. We can describe our bodies. We can have aspirations, spiritual aspirations, and at the same time we have physical bodies that are prone to failure, are prone to embarrassment. We trip and fall. Our bodies are not as pretty as we might like them to be, etc. This is me talking, and and Bergson's critique, I should say, according to the reputation, is that he was of such a stature at the time, and his critique was sufficient, that it is thought that it was his critique that cost relativity the Nobel Prize. The committee decided not to give a prize for relativity. Einstein, in fact, got the Nobel Prize for two other papers published that same year, very important ones, but not relativity, interestingly. So again, but ultimately, Einstein, in a way, sort of won the debate. He said he dismissed Bergson publicly, saying the time of the philosophers does not exist. I think the implication there is we have figured out time as much, in concrete ways, and we can proceed on that. And if we look at the 20th century, he basically won the argument. Bergson has all but retreated from public consciousness. Uh, I'd say this group is probably, an unusual sampling of people who would know. I think if you polled a general audience, very few have heard of Bergson. So to that degree, Einstein won. Um, and he was part of ushering in or participated in ushering in the modern era or modernism, where we, basically believed through a lot of the 20th century that science could answer all the ultimate questions and that we would figure it all out. Um, but even at that time, even apparently when Einstein was dismissing Bergson, privately he was saying he has a point. And later in his life, he much further acknowledged, or at least privately, that Bergson had some points up to and including near his death, probably within the same months that he was in touch with Sid Caesar. He referred to time as a stubbornly persistent illusion. He was referencing his friend's death and his own death at the time, but he was basically ceding that there was, this was in a letter that he was comforting the relatives of his friend who had died and anticipating his own death. So perhaps he was speaking metaphorically, but he was at least allowing for the possibility that there were more ways to think about time than he had. So coming back to how does this inform us about humor? And I mean, I guess what brings me to this and why I'm presenting these two, we have these two very significant figural thinkers of the 20th century who were at great odds for many decades. And yet they agreed on one thing, apparently, which is that humor is something worthy enough of paying attention. It's, Einstein apparently said he thought it was part of the human equation, and I think Bergson perhaps might have agreed on that. It was at least important enough to write a whole book about. And so I'm proceeding on what can we figure out about anything that they might have meant by that, or that they might have agreed about on that. And so first, in order to explore that, we're going to go back and see we're going to see that as far back as we can see in human history, there actually is evidence of humor. Surprisingly, some of the earliest things. This is a painting from the cave paintings in Lascaux. When I was in high school, these were presented as solemn, reverent, spiritual exercises, which they certainly are. I mean, obviously, these are beautiful paintings. I think you could submit them and get admitted to art school on the basis of these paintings today. Well, better than anything I could do anyway. And so this is obviously, 70,000 years ago, humans were capable of this kind of lyrical, elegiac expressions. And yet in Lascaux, there is only one drawing of a human being, one, and it's this. And this was commented on by Joseph Campbell. So you don't need to take my opinion for it. Campbell was basically describing this, and I would see it as humiliating. This is basically graffiti. This is a stick figure. I mean, they made no attempt to draw a beautiful picture of a person. This man, I won't go into the details, but I'll summarize it as he is being humiliated. He is often described as a shaman, but if so, he's not a very competent one. He's not a very successful one. He's on his back. He's about to be, let's say, humiliated by a bison, and and I would basically say this is not a drawing of human beings as an apex predator. These are drawings of someone of the we are represented in the cave paintings of Lascaux as silly and comic, let's say. So this is what we have. This is I guess you could even say this is this is the earliest painting of a human being that we have. I don't know that for sure, but I think Lascaux is referred to as the earliest paintings that we have. Um, the first footprints in North America, up until a few years ago, these happen to be in New Mexico, where I live. They are of human beings following a giant sloth 24,000 years ago. Up until a few years ago, it was described as um, human beings hunting the giant sloth. I'm going to skip over all the details, but there's some very elegant analysis of the footprints, really interesting science work done on it. And what they basically figured out is they could not have been hunting the sloth. What they would most likely have been doing is following it very closely and imitating it. The pattern of the footprints, where they're placed, how they're placed, and especially the fact that they're placed immediately after the sloth has removed its foot from the mud. They figured that out through extrusion analysis of the water going in and out, etc. Um, it was too close to even have been hunting, or they wouldn't have been hunting. They were. It seems that they were imitating it, possibly for the entertainment of children nearby. Um, as noted in my biography, I started out as a street mime, so I'm proud to say I think the first footprints of human beings in North America were of humans doing street mime. I think the proof of that is that the sloth seems to have gotten annoyed by the humans, turned around and faced them, and they backed off. So again, first fossil evidence of humans in North America. They were playing. They were at play, it seems, or possible to interpret as that they were. Um, and in fact, play goes back. I mean, it's pervasive throughout the at least mammal world. Play is what we do to practice what we need to be good at. Hunters practice hunting, hunting animals, predator animals practice hunting, prey practices escaping. Social animals practice connecting. Social animals tickle and cuddle and laugh. There's research on rats that they, in fact, laugh, that researchers can establish friendly relationships with rats where they invite tickling, participate in tickling. And when they're recorded and the recordings are slowed down and lined up with what's going on, it clearly seems to be laughter. Chirping, that sounds like that. And laughter is sort of in the same way as humans, that there can be a laugh to invite a tickle, and actually the rat will get annoyed if they do the invite to tickle laugh and they don't get the tickle, et cetera, et cetera. So the evidence seems pretty solid. And research on laughter by Robert Provine shows that actually laughter doesn't seem to be as closely connected with something funny happening as it is with moments of deep social connection, which I think is important, has helped me, by the way, in understanding when laughter comes up. As I've noticed, as mentioned in my bio, a lot of how I come to be thinking about all this is noticing how often laughter came up in the therapy room or in therapeutic situations or in crisis situations. And just thinking, and it didn't seem to me that it was incidental. It actually didn't even seem to me as much to be about relief of tension or the recognition of incongruity, or it seemed to me like something really, really important was happening. And one thing that we could say is moments of social connection. So I think when awkward laughter shows up, when somebody's talking about something painful or difficult, and they laugh, and then they apologize, saying this is inappropriate to laugh, or if we laugh with or at somebody as they're saying something painful, I think that we can look a little deeper and say, well, the laughter is a way to say, yes, this is painful. Yes, this is frightening. But we're in a safe space. That's what laughter does when predators are play fighting. They laugh to say we're safe. You don't have to, well, I think what happens for instance, when I say something, when I'm talking, I'll often laugh if I'm saying something painful that happened a long time ago. I think I'm signaling you don't have to feel the pain that I know you might think you have to, because this was a long time ago, or it doesn't relate, it doesn't affect you the same way it does me. I think all kinds of things can be signaled that way. And I think it makes it easier to just accept laughter as part of the process of dealing with the most important thing, which is that we are connected, that I'm saying something very important, very significant, and we're connected through that. And so now the question would be, okay, if it is true, and in fact, there's research suggesting that primates have had at least the vocal capacity to laugh for millions of years. There's genetic research that seems to suggest that. So if it's true that primates have been tickling and laughing, and as a way to develop social bonds, strengthen, practice, become comfortable with having the sense of a nervous system that is continuous with that of others, where the boundaries of our nervous system get blurred and we actually are experiencing the world in community with others. I think that's a way to understand tickling and laughing. Can we find a moment where where tickling and laughing became what humans know as humor? And if we can we what might that suggest about human ontogeny? And I think that we can. Research by Michael Tomasello, summarized in a book called Becoming Human, A Theory of Ontogeny. His much earlier work was described as the cooperative eye hypothesis. And it goes this way. If you stand in front of an ape, as Tomasello's researchers did, if they stand in front of an ape and you look them in the eyes, and then you point your face up toward the ceiling, but can't maintain eye contact, the ape will look up toward the ceiling. The ape will follow the direction of your face to suggest something is worth looking at. But if you do the opposite, if you look at an adult ape, hold your face still and turn your eyes toward the ceiling or anywhere, it's as if nothing happened. The eyes don't register. They're not paying attention to the eyes at all. This becomes interesting because in the same experiment, they did the same thing with human infants. Human infants are the opposite. They will follow your eyes. It's hardwired as humans. We know to look at eyes. We know to follow eyes. And Tomasello's theory is that this is actually the moment that we became human, when we started to see the world collectively, when we started to realize, all the information that we need is not solely available to us. We do not see the world solely through our own perspective. We are aware of all the perspectives around us and weave them together into a sense of coordinated, I think it's been described as a matrix of coordinated action, maybe in other contexts. Human eyes, in fact, are distinct on the planet for the fact that you can always see the sclera, the fact that the sclera, the white of the eye, is always very pronounced, and that the iris is also very pronounced. And what that means is that the eye telegraphs where we're looking. We can tell where we're looking, where somebody else is looking, to a very precise degree. In fact, when I started reading about this or knowing about this over 20 years ago, I would sometimes play a game where if somebody was talking to me, I would sometimes just focus my eye on the tip of their nose or on their left ear. And I found when I did that, almost all the time, the person would lose their train of thought. They would just completely forget what they were saying. And then as soon as I brought my eyes back to their eyes and gave them a little physical encouragement, they would find themselves again. So what this suggests to me is that we really depend on each other to be able to form a thought at all. We'd really depend on each other to get a sense of, the world, or even what we're trying to say. It's a very collective action. I put the word peekaboo there because I think that begins in infancy when when we're looking at a baby and looking away and saying peekaboo, we're beginning the process of them being able to understand and manage and relate to, looking in eyes, and it's a very powerful thing. It's basically what I'm trying to say. Out of I invite you to look in these eyes, for instance, and notice, what does it feel like? How do you feel when you stare into these eyes? Um, I don't know if I can even get your response, but I'll just say what other people say when I've asked this in live presentations. People generally are very disturbed. They describe this person as evil or not human. And that's very interesting to me, to say not human. I mean, what is it about this that is not human? I think, again, I think when we're talking about being human, we're talking about joining together in seeing the world. And that, causes me to bring my riff on Descartes, which is, well, translated as, I think, therefore I worry about what you are thinking. Uh, which actually, I think if you go back to Descartes, to, the how that cogito ergo sum came out of uh, skepticism and doubt. I think you could actually insert the presence of others into that thought. But basically, yeah, I think it's not enough to say, I think, therefore I am. It's actually, I think, therefore we are. Actually, I think that is said in some places. Um, and this, I think, is where humor begins, actually. That humor, what humor does is it recapitulates that process of moving from your own individual perspective, which you might think is certain, which you might think is all you need to know, which you might have confidence in, which you might, have reason to defend. And a joke, what a joke does is it sets up the process of uh, first showing you a perspective, like the rule of threes. A joke gives you two examples. And once you get to the second example, you start to say, okay, I know what this story is. I know what this perspective is. I know the deal. And then the third example says, no, you don't. There's another way of looking at this. There's a whole other perspective you didn't know about. There's another person, from this other person's perspective, this looks entirely different. And what good humor does, I think what we may think of positive humor does, is it helps us go through that whole process of going through the fear, the disorientation, the vertigo, the indignation, the irritation, the anger that might come with, being told you don't know everything. And then it helps get you a really elegant humor that I respect, gets you to the point of saying, oh, this is actually better. It's better that I can see more than I thought I knew, more than I could see yesterday. It means I'm not solely reliant on myself. It means I am not alone. And I think that's what really good humor can do. And I will, if time allows, of course. Oh, uh, I have some ideas on how to actually note that choice point. Um, I'm going to start skipping things. Um, yes, and people might recognize that's an important phrase coming out of improv comedy. You never deny. So I think actually, I think there's a way to combine these two. Well, I'm going to describe what I've come up with the phrase. I forgot to mention one of the issues that Einstein had, or in the beginning, when quantum theory came about, et cetera, he had real issues with the concept of quantum entanglement, also known as spooky action at a distance. One of the major implications of that is that you can actually go faster, not only faster than the speed of light, but actually instantly traverse the universe in certain ways. That's what spooky action at a distance was. And he really bridled at that. He really resisted that because, it really challenged what he was asserting. But of course, quantum theory has held its own through his life and until now. And uh, I would say that actually perhaps what he was discovering at the end of his life was that and why comedy seemed to be important is because I think the experience of humor is that when you are lifted out of this individual perspective that you live in, and you realize that you are part of a vast social network that extends over the horizon and extends through time, suddenly you are part of a universe in which space and time are no longer relevant. Suddenly being part of the human fabric means you can in fact be everywhere all at once. You're freed of space and time. And so I started to think of humor as kooky action at a distance. Suddenly I can be essentially in the same room as, somebody who wrote a joke 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. Um, and I've developed these out of that. I've developed this spectrum of humor. It goes from the profane to the divine. Profane humor, I would say, is humor that we can all agree is mm, just not great, ugly, painful, insulting, has no redeeming value. So I'm not even going to address that. And divine humor is that which we might aspire to. Divine humor, we're talking about, the divine comedy, and there's a lot we could discuss about what that might be. But I'm going to focus just for the moment on the middle two, what I'm calling the mundane humor and sublime. I would say mundane humor deals with, the world, the mundane world, space and time, physical bodies, in and out groups, things that are just realities of our life. And sublime humor is humor that transcends, that lifts us somehow out of our perspective and gets us somewhere new. I say mundane humor, I used to call it low, or, I used to call it low and high humor, but I think there's a place for mundane humor. I mean, if we're talking about the humor that defines in and out groups, well, at least if you're talking about the humor within an in group, at least you're talking about the others. You're talking about joining the perspective of others that you're in the same group with, and that's not bad. But I'm saying there's another possibility. There's joining other groups. There's joining everybody together. So mundane humor says there's a finite number of perspectives. Some are right, some are wrong, and they are wrong, and we are right. Sublime humor says there are an infinite number of perspectives, and we can really use them all. They're all important. They're all good. Out of that, we might say mundane humor says something's funny because it's true. Some of you might have heard that phrase. I say, okay, that's, has some validity, but there's more. I think sublime humor is something's funny because one thing is true and also something else is true, and they're not easy or perhaps impossible to reconcile, but they're both true, they're both valid, and we have to deal with that. And I think that's what sublime humor does. Again, mundane humor reifies in and out groups. Sublime humor breaks down out in groups, in and out groups. Mundane humor reifies existing power structures. Sublime humor wipes them away. Mundane humor says we know the story, we know how it ends, and the sublime humor says the story's just beginning. I'm going to skip over that. Just a quick note on, some of this thinking started actually in a room near the Arctic Circle. This picture actually is from that vicinity, where this work that I've done with people in psychosis was being developed. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And then what I've found when I've worked with people, often in psychosis, often people who are terribly frightening, if not actually dangerous, that when the laughs arose, and I could say, what was that laugh? Where did that come from? What was behind that? What was under that? If we could track it, we would often find a double bind. We would find two imperatives that that person had been trying to live with, that were irreconcilable, the opinions of two parents that couldn't be reconciled, et cetera, et cetera. And some tips on how to use this is, if my approach to humor is valid, is how you insult somebody by saying a joke too soon, is by saying, is by failing to acknowledge that they're living in a story that is in fact true and is in fact, in some respect, the end. Like if somebody dealing with grief, a loved one has died, there's a way that it is absolutely true that the story of that relationship has come to an end. If you make a joke about that, you've lost them. There's nothing you can do after that. But if you can be present in a way that says this thing that you're living with is absolutely true, then it makes it possible that you can be there at the moment where it begins to be possible to say, and there's other ways to see it. There's other ways to look at it. There's a new story waiting to begin, or the person you've lost would see it this way. We can bring their perspective in. It isn't gone. And we all know, that wakes or whatever, that sort of thing happens. So the person, if he was here, he would say this or he would say that. And we're beginning to weave new ways forward in time. Quick acknowledgement here of Ibrahim and mindfulness. I think I noticed his phrase, allowing the silence. In my life, I've noticed it's easier to be funny if you're not looking for the words, if you're actually just making yourself available to the feeling in that space that there is some possibility here that I haven't seen yet. It's a feeling really more than a cognitive process. It's saying, I feel like there's some new perspective here. I haven't found it yet. And the more I could just relax and listen into the silence, the quicker the actual, whatever the joke was going to come from would happen. I think my time is up, right? Oh, quick. I thought I should offer a joke. I made this joke up. I'll do a quick analysis of it. How many philosophers does it take to screw in a light bulb? 2. To me, that's already beginning to be funny because it's saying there is another way to look at this. At first, it doesn't seem like there is, but there is. The answer is 2. We can go on from there. The question is, to me, this begins to be funny because we're beginning to frame a question that a philosopher might frame. A philosopher would say, well, the question is, such and so. So we're looking at it now through the perspective of philosophers. The question is, why are they in a light bulb? If that's funny to you, then I would propose it's funny because suddenly we're looking at it from a completely different perspective. We're not looking at it from the perspective of philosophers. We're looking at philosophers possibly doing something that, other than this group, people don't generally think of philosophers doing. So why I like this joke is it lives on a couple different levels. It lives on a mundane level, screwing in light bulbs and screwing in light bulbs. That's very mundane. But it's also a little sublime. It's a little elegant because suddenly we're being whipped around through multiple perspectives, the perspectives of looking at philosophers, perspectives of philosophers. Also, it changes scale. Suddenly we're looking at maybe very tiny philosophers or very large light bulbs. Or, suddenly we're in a space where we don't even know what the scale is, or whose perspective we're in. And to me, that's the essence of humor, is not knowing what perspective there is or might be possible. I think that's about it.
Thank you very much. Kermit, would you like to end the share so we can get back to the room?
Hopefully I can figure out how to.
Well, you have there we go. You did it. Thank you very much indeed. That was quite interesting. And we have only 6 minutes left. So if anyone wants to chime in and question anything, I know in the chat room someone wanted the references that you glossed over. Are you going to submit this paper for publication in our journal in its
I will.
Okay,
I
well,
will.
then that question's answered. Please be patient because it was Patricia who asked, all the papers being read today are invited for publication in APA's journal. So, of course, with that will come bundled the proper citations. Okay, but if you're urgently in need of this to get to sleep, then you could obviously email Kermit and he'll send you whatever. Tom, go ahead.
Hi, Kermit, and thanks for the paper. And a good joke at the end, too.
Oh, thank you. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Would you mind saying the difference between sublime and divine humor?
I kind of made the decision to not even attempt that. I think, I guess I would say divine, we're talking about something that's beyond us. And actually, there's a really interesting conversation to have about that. That if you want, we could have it. That would be a whole chapter in the book.
I bet more people will be interested.
Yeah. I just wanted to limit it to like the achievable. Yeah, but I think that's what it comes down to, is that we're talking about humor that is achievable, but yeah, we're talking about divine, and we're starting to get into things that we have to be humble about. But again, it would be fun to talk to you about that because there's a real story there.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. Patricia, you do have your hand up, right? So go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. I really enjoyed it a lot. Just a very quick question, because I know that the references will arrive. And if you've written something, please tell us because I would love to read what you have written. And two things: the relationship between humor and irony, if you can, because that's a strong point, because and then this is a question, and then a little thing. I really did appreciate the things you said about rats and mice laughing. That's really, I love that. That's it.
It's great stuff. It's great research.
I really love, because this opened a big question about animals, which of course there is no time to, but I really love that. But the relation between humor and irony, because I'm writing about that, and
Well, what I would have to say about that is that, again, in trying to figure out these distinctions between what I'm referring to as mundane or sublime humor, I'd say mundane, in the mundane realm, or even into the profane realm, I would call it sarcasm. And then once, in the sense that sarcasm just sort of like it notes something. We could describe what it is that it's noting, but it's noting something, but introducing no change to it, no other way of looking at it. Whereas I think once you cross over into irony, irony introduces the possibility of some greater understanding coming from the tension between these two things, whereas sarcasm doesn't set the conditions for it.
But in your opinion, in your view, they all belong to the big family of humor. You put them inside sarcasm, irony.
Yes, although I would say, sarcasm, I would say, is undesirable. And what I'm trying to introduce is a way to navigate the choice point between sarcasm and irony.
I agree.
We have 2 minutes. And Vana has her hand up. I would also like to give Lydia 1 minute. Lydia is basically the founder of a whole new field of philosophy of humor, and internationally so. And I think she's in the house, so I would love to get her quick take, Kermit, on you and your presentation today. I think it would be instructive to hear some feedback from Lydia. And Vana has her hand up, so can Vana and Lydia each do 1 minute? Go ahead, Vana, and we'll give Lydia the last question. Okay, go ahead, Vana. Please unmute.
A quick question. I work in a lot of institutions with substance abuse counselors and psychotherapists, and most of them regard humor as a form of denial, and they want to break through it. Do you have any comments on that?
I'd love to have that conversation. Yes. I think what first, there's obviously more than can be said in a few seconds, but what first comes to mind is I think that we tend to have an arm's length relationship to humor because it is so powerful, because it actually, I think it's because it's so essential. It's like intimacy. We're very careful about that in a therapeutic situation. Similarly with humor, we just don't go there. We set this broad, clear line, and I think it's unfortunate because actually, if you have the preparation and the courage and the tools to approach it, which I propose that I can have out of this, then you can approach it safely. You can use it to identify, as I said previously, unidentified binds and things in a way that they can be worked with and transformed.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to be brief, but I still want to give Lydia the last question if she wants to ask one. Okay, Lydia, go ahead.
Thank you. Vana, this is very important what you just said, and your answer, Kermit, because humor has been defined as a kind of defense mechanism. So indeed, it can be a form of denial. It expresses ambivalence. This is what Kermit has said about the double bind. It expresses a conflict. So if the conflicts can be solved or resolved on another level, humor is a good point to begin work with that. So both of you can be accommodated here. Now, Kermit, this was absolutely fantastic. Whatever you said, that humor enables a social space, it's actually a signal that aggressivity or aggression or anxiety is for the moment relieved, and we agree to collaborate, yes, and we enjoy that space in which we are safe for a moment. And whatever else you also said, the double bind, the conflict is very important, and the levels of humor. One word about Patricia and your discussion. There is a difference between different languages. Irony in Italian has many times the meaning of humor in English. So I know this from my friends in Italy. So this is a little bit confusing. Humor now is considered an umbrella term, in which you have all these things. And the difference in English between irony and humor is much more accentuated than in Italy, in which they said ironia for humor. So thank you so much, Kermit. It was absolutely fantastic, and I would love to continue the discussion with you.
Well, that means everything to me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lydia. You got the seal, the gold seal of approval, Kermit, from an important philosopher of humor. But anyway, it was great, and I appreciate your sense of humor, by the way. So thank you so much for this. And we're going to move on, all right, without further ado. Thanks again, Kermit, and we'll get the recording up, and we'll get your paper into the works as well, okay? Wonderful presentation. Thank you much.